Human behavior is often seen as rational, predictable, and ultimately good at its core. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if beneath the comforting layers of empathy, love, trust, and resilience lies a darker truth? One built on contradiction, self-deception, and unintended consequences. This is not a journey into the extremes of villainy or psychopathy. It's a mirror turned back on the everyday, the familiar, the well-meaning behaviors we celebrate. But when examined closely, these same behaviors reveal paradoxes that are unsettling, even regrettable. We like to think that kindness heals, that trust builds, that love redeems. But what happens when kindness cripples, when trust enables betrayal, when love becomes a trap? This exploration isn't about judging human nature. It's about exposing its contradictions, the twisted feedback loops we get stuck in, the actions we celebrate that slowly undo us from within. You may recognize yourself in these paradoxes. You may even feel discomfort. That's the point, because once you see these hidden patterns in human behavior, you can't unsee them. And maybe you'll wish you never did. Let's begin with the first paradox: empathy that demanded cruelty. Empathy is often seen as the highest form of human connection, the ability to feel what others feel, to imagine oneself in their pain, to respond with care. It is taught to children as a virtue, lauded in leaders, expected in relationships, and idolized in stories. But what if empathy, in its purest form, doesn't just lead to kindness? What if it demands cruelty? Not by accident, not as a side effect, but as a condition of its very existence. Imagine a society where people feel deeply the suffering of others. The pain of a stranger on the street becomes your pain. The cries of a child in a war-torn country are felt in your chest as if they were your own. On the surface, this sounds beautiful, compassionate, even divine. But when everyone's pain becomes your pain, how long before you start to hate the source of it? How long before you turn your empathy into a weapon, not against the victim, but against whoever you believe caused their suffering? Empathy fuels outrage. When you see someone harmed, empathy does not just want you to understand, it pushes you to act. But that action can be twisted. You empathize with one group and begin to demonize another. You feel the anguish of the wounded and start to demand punishment, not justice. You cry for the oppressed and grow blind to the humanity of the oppressor. The deeper you empathize, the more you are driven to eliminate what causes that empathy, to hurt. And sometimes that means becoming cruel yourself, righteously, passionately, even violently. History is filled with acts of unspeakable cruelty committed in the name of compassion. Revolutions, purges, uprisings, many began with empathy for the downtrodden, the abused, the forgotten. But empathy does not come with a built-in compass. It is a force, and like any force, it needs direction. Without wisdom, empathy becomes selective. You cry for the suffering of your tribe, but ignore the suffering of another. You rush to avenge your friend's pain, but cannot feel the enemy's tears. You justify cruelty because it feels like kindness to someone else. Even in personal relationships, empathy can turn. A parent who empathizes too strongly with a child's pain might begin to smother them. They overprotect, interfere, remove all discomfort, believing they are helping, while slowly eroding the child's capacity to grow resilient. a partner, desperate to ease their loved one's distress, might lie for them, cover for them, make decisions on their behalf, all in the name of empathy, all with good intentions. But good intentions do not protect us from consequences. Worse still, some learn to weaponize empathy. They manipulate others by making them feel their suffering. The more someone else empathizes, the more control they relinquish. Guilt becomes currency. Victimhood becomes power. And those who empathize the most are the easiest to break. It is a twisted reversal. The kindest hearts become the most vulnerable to cruelty, and sometimes the most willing to inflict it. There's also a dark economy of empathy at play in the digital age. Online, the suffering of others is packaged or shared, consumed. Every tragedy becomes a story to be felt and reacted to. Empathy is demanded on a mass scale, but the brain cannot handle limitless pain. So we triage. We empathize with stories that align with our identity and filter out the rest. We grow cold to distant suffering and amplify outrage over nearby harm. We become callous in the name of selective caring. Eventually, we reach a breaking point. When empathy becomes overwhelming, we don't expand our compassion. We narrow it. We draw lines between us and them. We simplify complex pain into binaries, good and evil, right and wrong, victim and villain. And the moment we decide someone is the villain, truly, irredeemably, the paradox fully activates. We feel their suffering and enjoy it. We feel justified in causing it because we believe it's for the greater good, for the ones we empathize with. This is the cruelty that empathy demands. Not always, not inevitably, but potentially. When empathy is unchecked, unexamined, or used without reflection, it does not elevate us. It divides us. It leads us to commit acts we would never consider without the emotional rush of righteous pain. And that's the paradox. To protect the ones we feel for, we might destroy the ones we don't. Empathy is not the enemy, but it is not the savior either. It is a fire. It can warm, or it can burn. It needs guidance. It needs discipline. Because if left untamed, empathy does not just lead us to kindness. It can lead us straight to cruelty, all while whispering that we are doing the right thing. And once you've seen this paradox, you'll start noticing it everywhere. In politics, in relationships, in every call to do something without fully understanding the cost. You'll realize that empathy, for all its beauty, is not innocent. Next is a paradox equally unnerving: kindness that expected suffering. Kindness is supposed to be simple. You do something good for someone, and the world becomes just a little bit better. It's a clean gesture, an offering of comfort, help, or generosity. But underneath this universally praised behavior lies a paradox so subtle that most people never notice it until it stings. This is the paradox of kindness that expects suffering in return. Not because the kindness was fake, but because it was secretly transactional. And the moment that transaction is not fulfilled, something turns bitter inside. You've probably seen it in its most innocent form. Someone does a favor and later says, "I did all that for you, and you couldn't do this one thing for me." Or someone gives without asking, but their voice cracks with resentment when they're not repaid in kindness. The paradox here is not that they were unkind, but that their kindness came with an invisible price tag. And when that price isn't paid, the kindness mutates into guilt, frustration, or even hostility. People don't always realize this expectation is baked into their actions. They believe they are being selfless. They tell themselves they're doing good because it's right. But deep inside, many are hoping, sometimes desperately, that their kindness will be acknowledged, returned, or at least remembered. When it's not, they feel invisible, used, and that feeling becomes more painful than never having been kind at all. This hidden cost turns even the purest acts of generosity into emotional time bombs. The person who always listens, but never gets heard. The one who gives gifts, but receives no gratitude. The friend who helps you move, expecting you to do the same, even if they never say it. All of them operate under a social contract that was never signed, but somehow always enforced. And when it's broken, the hurt explodes in ways they can't explain. Not because they were wrong to be kind, but because they were wrong to believe kindness guaranteed reciprocity. There's also a deeper psychological root to this paradox. For some, kindness is not about love or empathy. It's about control. They give, not to empower you, but to create a debt. A moral debt. Something you owe, even if you didn't ask for it. It's like they've handed you invisible chains with a smile. They appear generous on the outside, but their giving puts them in a position of quiet superiority. The more they give, the more they feel entitled to your loyalty, your time, your attention. And when you don't respond how they imagined, they feel betrayed, not by you, but by the failure of the image they built of themselves. This can become especially toxic in relationships. A partner who showers you with affection but crumbles when you don't meet their emotional needs exactly how they envisioned. A parent who sacrificed everything, only to weaponize that sacrifice later. I gave you my life, they might say, and this is how you treat me. The kindness was real, but it came with an expiration date. And when that date passes without return, the love turns sour. Even more disturbingly, this paradox shows up in systems of power. Governments, charities, even religious institutions sometimes practice kindness that expects gratitude from the less fortunate. They provide aid, but if the recipients don't show the right kind of humility or gratitude, that aid is threatened or withdrawn. It's as if the kindness wasn't given freely, but loaned on the condition of suffering or submission. The moment the recipients begin to rise, question, or speak with agency, the kindness dries up. Because the unspoken rule was, you're supposed to stay needy for this to work. This reveals the cruel twist of the paradox. Some people, institutions or cultures, are only kind to those who remain small. The moment you stop needing them, their kindness disappears. Why? Because your suffering validated their identity as a good person. Your pain gave their actions meaning. And without that imbalance, they feel useless, irrelevant. So deep down, they expect you to suffer, just a little, so they can continue being kind. This paradox infects even those with the best intentions. A teacher who thrives on helping struggling students might unconsciously resist seeing those students succeed without them. A therapist may form identity around healing others, and then subtly prolong the pain to remain needed. It's not always malicious, but it is real, and when you become aware of it, truly aware, it can shake the foundations of how you interpret kindness in the world around you. You begin to see when someone is giving from love versus when they're giving from fear. Fear of being forgotten, replaced, irrelevant. You notice when kindness comes with quiet strings, and you notice how often the suffering of the receiver is a condition, unspoken but essential. for the giver to feel good about themselves. That's what makes this paradox so insidious. Kindness is supposed to uplift, but when it's built on expectation, it can crush. It can create silent contracts that destroy relationships. It can train people to stay broken just to keep love. It can manipulate entire communities into silence, submission, and self-erasure. Kindness should never be a leash, and yet, in its dark form, that's exactly what it becomes. Next is a paradox that distorts morality itself. Help that hurt more than harm. Helping others is one of the core pillars of human society. From early childhood, we're taught to lend a hand, offer support, be there for those in need. It's seen as unquestionably good, an act of kindness, selflessness, even heroism. But buried deep within the instinct to help is a dangerous and often invisible paradox. That help, even when sincerely offered, can cause more damage than the harm it seeks to undo. This isn't about obvious failures, like giving bad advice or enabling toxic behavior. This is about something more subtle, the kind of help that feels right in the moment but erodes the very person it's meant to protect. Imagine a friend who keeps pulling you out of trouble instead of letting you face the consequences. A parent who does everything for their child, thinking they're sparing them pain, but actually robbing them of the tools to survive on their own. A partner who fixes every problem for you until one day you can't solve anything without them. That's help turned harmful, not because it was cruel, but because it prevented growth. We often confuse short-term relief with long-term healing. True help doesn't always feel good. It challenges, it provokes, it demands change. But the help most people give is comfort-based. It aims to soothe, to rescue, to remove pain as quickly as possible, and in doing so, it can trap the person in the very state they're trying to escape from. A friend battling addiction is constantly bailed out. Money, shelter, excuses. It feels like support, but each act of help reinforces the behavior. The pain they should have faced never arrives. And without that pain, the wake-up call never comes. There's also the issue of dependency. Help, when overused or misused, creates imbalance. The helper becomes the savior. The one being helped becomes the helpless. Roles solidify. Identity forms. The one receiving help begins to see themselves not as capable, but as someone who needs help to survive. The more they're helped, the less they believe they can stand on their own. And eventually, even if they want to break free, they don't know how. They've been saved too many times to believe in their own strength. This creates another ripple. Resentment, not just from the one being helped, but from the helper as well. The helper over time might begin to feel drained, taken for granted, used. Their help wasn't appreciated the way they expected. The relationship becomes strained. Boundaries blur. And then, when the helper finally pulls away, it feels like betrayal, even though the damage began long before. It began with help that wasn't really help at all. On a broader scale, this paradox shows up in global systems. Foreign aid programs meant to help developing nations sometimes destroy local economies by flooding them with free goods that undercut native production. Donations that build wells in villages leave the communities dependent on foreign maintenance and technology. Medical missions offer short-term solutions without empowering local health systems to thrive independently. These are not acts of malice. They are acts of misguided kindness. Help without foresight. Help that displaces responsibility instead of cultivating it. In many of these cases, the core issue lies in ego. Helping feels good. It makes the helper feel valuable, important, even virtuous. But when the desire to help is driven more by how it makes you feel than what the other person actually needs, harm becomes inevitable. The helper's ego takes center stage, and the recipient's growth is overshadowed by the helper's desire to be needed. There's also the power imbalance. Helping someone often puts you in a position of authority, deciding what's best for them, guiding their choices, sometimes even speaking on their behalf. In that moment, their agency begins to erode. They may accept the help because they need it, but slowly they lose their voice. They become passive. Their life is no longer fully theirs. It's shaped by the intentions, decisions, and values of the one offering help. This is not to say help is wrong, but help must be intelligent, and most importantly, help must be wanted. One of the most overlooked truths is that unsolicited help often causes more harm than good. When people aren't ready to be helped, when they haven't asked, or when help is offered in ways that override their autonomy, it becomes a form of control, a soft kind of oppression dressed in kindness. There's a saying, don't rob someone of their struggle. And it's true. Some lessons can only be learned through experience, through falling and getting back up. When we try to protect people from those falls, we're not saving them, we're stealing from them. We're stealing their chance to become resilient, to earn wisdom, to develop grit. And what begins as an act of love becomes, quietly, a barrier to becoming whole. So the next time you feel the urge to help, pause. Ask yourself, who is this really for? Am I helping in a way that empowers or in a way that comforts me? Am I giving support or stealing growth? Because sometimes the most damaging thing you can do for someone is help them. Next comes a paradox that turns affection into isolation. Love that feared intimacy. Love is often portrayed as the ultimate destination in the human emotional journey. We chase it, dream of it, define our lives around it. Love promises belonging, safety, warmth, connection. But within this ideal lies one of the most painful and hidden paradoxes of all. Sometimes, the deeper the love, the greater the fear of true intimacy. And in trying to get close, people unknowingly build walls that keep others out. At first, it seems impossible. How could love and intimacy be at odds? Isn't love the fuel of intimacy? But love is not always light. It's not always freeing. For some, love becomes a threat, a mirror reflecting parts of themselves they don't want to confront. To love someone deeply is to be vulnerable, to be seen. And being seen for many is terrifying. People carry wounds. Childhood rejection, betrayal, shame, abandonment. These traumas don't disappear when love arrives. They hide beneath it. And when someone starts to get close, those buried fears resurface. What if they stop loving me once they see the real me? What if I'm not enough? What if I lose myself in them? These questions breed anxiety. The very thing the person desires, intimacy, triggers defense mechanisms meant to protect them from past pain. So they pull away, not because they don't love, but because love feels too dangerous. The paradox grows when love becomes performance. Afraid of losing the other person, one may begin to curate themselves, to hide flaws, suppress opinions, become overly agreeable. But intimacy demands truth. It demands the unfiltered self. So while love deepens, authenticity fades. The relationship becomes a stage where two people play idealized versions of themselves, terrified that revealing their true selves will destroy everything. What started as love turns into fear-based acting. There's also a strange way in which love becomes conditional, not in words but in behaviors. I will only be safe with you as long as I don't show you too much. The more they love, the more cautious they become. They begin to share less, open up less, avoid the difficult conversations. Intimacy is replaced with routine, with rituals of closeness that look like connection but lack the rawness of real vulnerability. Over time, this creates an emotional drought. Two people who love each other deeply may find themselves emotionally starving, unable to bridge the silence between them. This is particularly common in people who were taught that love must be earned. If they grew up in environments where love was tied to achievement, obedience, or emotional labor, they internalize a belief that true connection is dangerous unless constantly maintained. Intimacy, which requires letting go, contradicts their survival strategy. So even in loving relationships, they sabotage closeness, picking fights, withdrawing, creating emotional distance, because it feels safer than surrender, even physical. Intimacy, often seen as the ultimate expression of love, can fall prey to this paradox. For some, physical closeness becomes a substitute for emotional vulnerability. They seek comfort in touch, but shy away from real conversation. The body becomes the last place they can feel safe, while the mind and heart remain guarded. What appears to be passion may actually be a wall in disguise, an avoidance of deeper connection masked as desire. There's a cultural layer to this as well. We are often shown love as a perfect image, flawless couples, romantic resolutions, emotional certainty. But real intimacy is messy. It involves crying in front of someone. It involves revealing parts of your past that make you feel broken. It involves silence, discomfort, and sometimes confrontation. People who are conditioned to avoid messiness may find themselves in love, yet utterly unable to access true intimacy because it doesn't match the script they were handed. The tragedy of this paradox is that both people in the relationship usually feel it. The one who fears intimacy becomes distant, unknowingly hurting the one they love. And the one on the receiving end begins to wonder, why can't I reach them? What am I doing wrong? This creates a feedback loop of confusion, frustration, and often heartbreak. Both feel disconnected, both are in pain, but neither knows how to cross the bridge. Healing this paradox requires immense courage. It means confronting the fear that love will break you. It means allowing someone to see you without the armor. It means being willing to risk rejection in exchange for real closeness. For many, this feels like walking into fire. But on the other side is the only thing that can make love sustainable. Truth. To love someone and not let them in is to hold water in your hands while trying not to spill. Eventually, it slips through anyway. True intimacy cannot survive in a space of fear. It demands presence. It demands imperfection. It demands the risk that the person you love might see everything and still stay. But until that leap is taken, love remains a beautiful prison, safe, polished, and ultimately alone. Next is a paradox where vulnerability becomes a trap. Trust that invited betrayal. Trust is one of the most sacred elements of human connection. It's the invisible thread that binds relationships, communities, and entire societies. To trust someone is to hand them a part of yourself, your secrets, your needs, your safety, and believe they will not use it against you. It's a leap across a chasm, a surrender of control, a declaration of faith. But hidden within this beautiful act is a dangerous paradox. Sometimes, the more you trust someone, the more power you give them to betray you, and the more likely that betrayal becomes. This doesn't mean trust is inherently flawed. Rather, it means trust is not always rewarded with loyalty. In fact, trust can invite manipulation. The more you open yourself up, the more someone, intentionally or not, can exploit that openness. And in many cases, it's not the malicious enemy that breaks the trust. It's the beloved friend, the loyal partner, the smiling mentor. Not because they set out to betray you, but because the trust itself gave them the means, the opportunity, and sometimes the unconscious permission to do so. Think of how trust functions in most relationships. You tell someone your fears, your patterns, your triggers. You assume this vulnerability will bring closeness, and often it does. But now that person knows where your wounds are, and if they ever become angry, insecure, or distant, even for a moment, they have access to the most sensitive parts of you. They may not weaponize your vulnerability at first, but the temptation exists, and eventually some do, either through passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, or outright betrayal. This is the paradox. The very act of trusting someone builds the road they might use to walk away from you, or worse, walk over you. The more you trust, the more you can be hurt. And sometimes, the trust itself becomes a trap you walked into willingly. There's also the issue of perceived safety. When you trust someone completely, you relax your boundaries. You stop questioning motives. You give the benefit of the doubt, but people change. Circumstances shift. Someone you trusted last year might not be the same person today. And yet, your guard remains down, because your mind still clings to the version of them you first trusted. This delay in updating your emotional map makes betrayal not just painful, but shocking, because it arrives in a space you thought was safe. The paradox grows darker when we realize that some people are drawn to trust as a tool of control. They cultivate your trust carefully, patiently, sometimes for months or years. They seem kind, attentive, trustworthy. They listen, they show up, and then, when the timing is right, they exploit it. Not all at once, but in increments. They ask for favors. They cross boundaries slowly. They begin to twist the narrative so that you feel guilty for pulling away. This kind of betrayal doesn't feel like a betrayal at first. It feels like confusion. You wonder if you're imagining things. After all, you trusted them. This subtle manipulation is most visible in toxic workplaces, abusive relationships, and certain forms of leadership. The person in power earns trust, not through honesty, but through charm and positioning. Once they have it, they stop earning it. They start using it. And because they were once so trustworthy, people hesitate to challenge them, even when the signs are clear. Even more tragically, betrayal doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from weakness. A person you trust might betray you not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't handle your expectations. Maybe they crumbled under pressure. Maybe they lied to avoid conflict. Maybe they just weren't ready to be held to the standard your trust placed upon them. And still, the pain lands the same. Because when you trust someone, you hand them responsibility, not just for their actions, but for the part of you that depended on them. This creates another layer of the paradox. The betrayal of trust doesn't just break the relationship. It breaks something inside the person who trusted. You begin to doubt your judgment. You question your memory. How did I not see it coming? Was I blind? Am I too naive? The betrayal echoes backward in time, corrupting every good moment you shared. You start to wonder if it was ever real, or if the entire connection was a lie built for convenience. Some respond by withdrawing completely. They build walls so high that no one can earn their trust again. But this too is a prison. Because without trust, intimacy becomes impossible. Connection withers, relationships stagnate, and the very thing that makes betrayal possible, trust, is also the thing that makes love, friendship, and community meaningful. So what do we do with this paradox? We learn to trust wisely, not blindly. We understand that trust must be paired with discernment, not idealism. We realize that trust is not a gift, it is a responsibility, and it must be monitored, not as a sign of paranoia, but as an act of self-respect. Because while trust can invite betrayal, it can also invite the deepest forms of connection when placed in the right hands. Next is a paradox where giving becomes self-serving. Generosity, that fed ego. Generosity is widely praised as a virtue. It's celebrated in religious texts, promoted in self-help culture, and admired in people across all walks of life. To give without expecting anything in return, that's the gold standard of moral behavior. But what if, beneath the polished surface of generosity, there's a hidden hunger? What if some acts of giving are less about helping others and more about feeding the self? This is the paradox. Generosity that appears selfless but secretly fuels the ego. At first glance, a generous person seems admirable. They donate time, money, attention. They show up, they sacrifice. But over time, a strange pattern begins to emerge. Their giving is always noticed, always remembered, always woven into the narrative of who they are. It's not just that they give, it's that they need to be seen giving. And when their efforts aren't acknowledged, when their contributions go unnoticed or uncelebrated, a subtle bitterness creeps in. The act that was supposed to be selfless becomes a demand for recognition. This is where ego enters. Ego doesn't always wear arrogance. Sometimes it hides behind kindness. It tells you you're the good one. It whispers, you're better because you give. And if unchecked, generosity becomes a performance, a way to construct a moral identity that others admire and, more importantly, depend on. The giver begins to measure their worth by how needed they are, and once they feel less needed, they feel less valuable. Consider the person who constantly pays the bill at dinner, insists on helping everyone move, offers solutions to every problem, but also keeps score. They might never say it aloud, but they remember every favor, every sacrifice. And if those around them don't respond with gratitude, loyalty, or praise, resentment simmers. This isn't generosity. This is ego in disguise. It's generosity that expects emotional payment, not in money, but in admiration, in importance, in moral superiority. Even philanthropy, the most visible form of generosity, is not immune. Major donors often attach their names to buildings, awards, foundations. They give, but they also brand their giving. Their generosity becomes part of their public identity, a legacy they curate. This doesn't necessarily make the act bad. Lives can still be changed, but the motivation becomes muddied. Was the gift for others or for the self-image of the giver? There's also the savior complex, where generosity is used to feel powerful. Some people give to others not to lift them up, but to keep them dependent. As long as someone needs their help, they have purpose. They are in control. But the moment the person becomes self-sufficient, the generous one feels threatened. Their ego loses fuel. So, consciously or not, they may sabotage the independence of those they help, offering just enough support to keep them afloat, but not enough to let them truly thrive. In personal relationships, this can be deeply toxic. A partner who does everything for you might hold that over your head. After all I've done for you, they say, as if their past kindnesses entitle them to control or obedience. Their generosity becomes a cage, and if you question it, you're seen as ungrateful. The truth is, they weren't giving freely. They were building emotional debt, and you're expected to pay indefinitely. This paradox doesn't stop at individuals. It permeates cultures. In some societies, generosity is tied to honor and pride. To refuse help is to offend. To question motives is disrespect. So the act of giving becomes layered with pressure, obligation, and control. The giver maintains a reputation. The receiver carries invisible chains. And here's where the damage deepens. Those on the receiving end of ego-driven generosity often feel manipulated without understanding why. They feel guilt instead of gratitude. They feel watched instead of supported. They feel indebted, even if no debt was spoken aloud. The generosity, instead of empowering, disempowers. It reinforces hierarchy. It says, I have what you lack, and I'm good because I give it to you. Of course, not all generosity is corrupted by ego. There are those who give and walk away, who offer without recording, who help and never mention it again. But these people are rare, not because kindness is rare, but because ego is subtle. It attaches itself to even the most virtuous acts. It disguises itself as morality. And unless we reflect deeply, we might not even notice it. So what do we do with this paradox? We examine our motives. We ask ourselves, if no one knew I was doing this, would I still do it? If I never receive thanks, would I still give? Am I helping someone grow or keeping them small so I can feel big? True generosity is quiet. It gives without needing applause. It lifts without pressing down. It supports without staking a claim. It does not build its identity on the backs of others. It does not whisper, "You owe me." Because when generosity is pure, ego has no place to hide. Next is a paradox that distorts justice itself. Morality that excused violence. Morality is supposed to be our compass. It's what tells us right from wrong, good from evil, justice from cruelty. We turn to it for guidance, for clarity, for a framework that helps us act in a chaotic world. But morality isn't always a shield against harm. Sometimes it becomes the very tool that justifies it. And that's the paradox. When people believe they are morally right, they can become capable of terrifying violence and feel nothing but pride for committing it. History is filled with atrocities committed not in spite of moral conviction, but because of it. Wars, inquisitions, genocides, and purges have all been carried out under the banner of righteousness. The executioner did not see himself as evil. He saw himself as virtuous. He believed he was doing what was necessary for the greater good, for God, for country, for justice. The deeper the moral certainty, the less room there is for doubt, and the more dangerous the conviction becomes. That's the core of this paradox. Morality, when rigid, stops being a guide and starts being a weapon. People stop asking, "Is this kind?" and start saying, "This is deserved." They don't consider empathy, they demand punishment. And once punishment is morally justified, the line between justice and cruelty blurs. It's no longer, "I hurt you because I hate you." It's, "I hurt you because it's right." This shift allows people to commit acts they'd normally find appalling if done by others or for other reasons. But under the influence of moral superiority, those same acts are reframed. The violence becomes noble, the anger becomes righteous, the cruelty becomes justice, and the more someone believes they are morally pure, the less they question their methods. This can manifest in everyday life. Someone confronts a wrongdoer online and encourages harassment. They deserved it, they say. They're a bad person. And suddenly, a mob forms. Doxing, threats, ruined lives, all in the name of doing what's right. But beneath the surface, there's something darker at play. The thrill of judgment, the high of being the punisher, the intoxicating power of moral clarity that no longer needs to pause for context, nuance, or mercy. You can see this in families too. A parent insists their harsh discipline is for the child's own good. A sibling cuts off contact to set boundaries, but secretly seeks revenge. In both cases, the actions are framed as moral, but they conceal unresolved emotions, anger, pain, fear. The moral explanation sanitizes the impulse. It makes cruelty feel acceptable, even necessary. The real danger lies in how morality can shut down self-reflection. If you believe you're on the side of good, you stop questioning yourself. You see opposition as evil, and once the world is divided into good and evil, violence becomes a tool of purification. You're not hurting someone, you're removing a problem. You're not acting out of rage, you're fulfilling a duty. Religious extremism is a clear example, but it's far from the only one. Political ideologies, cultural values, even social justice movements can fall into this trap. When movements prioritize moral purity over human complexity, they begin to eat their own. Dissent becomes betrayal, nuance becomes weakness, and anyone who questions the methods is labeled complicit, or worse, an enemy. What begins as a fight for justice ends in a crusade. And crusades don't tolerate empathy, they demand obedience. This paradox also reveals something uncomfortable about ourselves. We like to think that only evil people commit violence, but often it's the most well-intentioned who do the most damage, because they believe they're incapable of wrongdoing. They don't see themselves as capable of cruelty, so when they act cruelly, they don't even notice it. Their morality blinds them. This doesn't mean that moral values are useless. It means they're dangerous when unexamined. Morality must be flexible, self-aware, and humble. It must leave room for contradiction, doubt, and dialogue. Without those, it becomes dogma. And dogma, no matter how noble its origin, eventually demands blood. We must also learn to ask deeper questions. Not just, what do I believe is right? But, what might I be ignoring in the name of what's right? Who suffers under my certainty? Am I seeking justice or permission to unleash something darker? Because sometimes, violence isn't born out of hatred. It's born out of love for an ideal. That's what makes it so hard to detect, and so devastating in its impact. True morality doesn't just tell us who to punish. It teaches us when to pause, when to forgive, when to let go. It demands humility, not certainty. And most of all, it reminds us that being right does not give us the right to harm. Because once morality becomes a reason to stop questioning ourselves, we are no longer on the side of good. We've simply renamed the violence. Next is a paradox where purity hides a predator, innocence that manipulated, innocence evokes trust. It's the quality we instinctively protect, admire, and rally around. The innocent are seen as untouched by corruption, free of hidden agendas, too naive to do harm. But this cultural reverence creates a strange and unsettling paradox. The more someone appears innocent, the more power they have to manipulate, because no one sees it coming. Innocence disarms us. It bypasses our usual defenses. When someone speaks softly, hesitates before answering, or seems unsure of themselves, we extend empathy. We fill in gaps. We give the benefit of the doubt. And when conflict arises, we are quick to assume they couldn't possibly be at fault. The paradox emerges when this very perception becomes a tool, not for protection, but for control. Some individuals, whether consciously or not, learn to weaponize the performance of innocence. This doesn't mean they are evil masterminds. Often the manipulation is subtle, unconscious, even socially reinforced. A person who appears fragile might get others to fight their battles. A coworker who plays confused in meetings avoids accountability. A partner who bursts into tears whenever challenged shuts down all arguments before they begin. These tactics are rarely identified as manipulation because they wear the mask of vulnerability, but the effect is the same. Control is exerted, truth is obscured, power is gained. Children sometimes do this without knowing why. A child breaks something and instinctively blames someone else, or cries to avoid punishment. Adults watching may forgive quickly, chalking it up to innocence. But some carry these habits into adulthood, learning that helplessness brings reward. They may not become overtly aggressive, but they learn to influence outcomes by appearing incapable, lost, or victimized. Society enables this. We are more likely to believe a soft voice than a firm one. We mistrust confidence and favor modesty. We paint the innocent as morally superior, but this creates dangerous blind spots. People who appear harmless are rarely questioned. Their intentions aren't scrutinized. And if they do cause harm, we instinctively look for someone else to blame. This dynamic becomes especially dangerous in power imbalances. For example, someone in a relationship who seems emotionally dependent may wield significant influence. Their neediness can compel their partner to compromise constantly, to avoid upsetting them, to take the blame just to keep the peace. The one who appears weakest begins to steer the entire emotional dynamic, not through dominance, but through perceived fragility. Even in larger systems, institutions, politics, communities, the illusion of innocence can be manipulated. A public figure caught in controversy might issue a teary apology, leaning on their good person image to deflect accountability. They don't argue the facts, they appeal to feelings. And often, it works. The public forgives, not because the truth is clear, but because the performance of innocence is so convincing. The paradox sharpens when you realize that innocence, as a social identity, comes with protection. If someone is labeled innocent by the group, whether due to their demeanor, background, or position, they can act with surprising impunity. Their word is trusted. Their actions are defended. Even when evidence mounts, people resist changing the narrative. They don't want to believe the innocent could also be cunning. That duality is too uncomfortable. So the manipulation continues, undetected. This isn't to say all innocence is false. Many people are truly naive, honest, and well-intentioned. But the danger lies in assuming innocence is a permanent trait rather than a temporary state. Anyone can appear innocent in one context and be manipulative in another. And when we lock people into a single identity, especially a flattering one, we stop seeing them clearly. Worse still, some manipulators actively cultivate innocence to gain control. They know how to present themselves as harmless. They know how to cry at the right moment, to play dumb just enough, to let others speak on their behalf. They never raise their voice, but they shape outcomes. They never make demands, but they receive everything they want. Their power lies in invisibility, because no one suspects them of playing a game at all. For those on the receiving end, this kind of manipulation is maddening. It's hard to name. It's hard to prove. If you call it out, you risk looking cruel, like you're bullying someone who's done nothing wrong. This protects the manipulator further. They can always retreat into victimhood, further entrenching their perceived innocence. And the cycle continues. To break this paradox, we must separate behavior from appearance. Innocence is not a shield against accountability. Vulnerability is not always virtuous. And manipulation doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It can be soft, tearful, and wrapped in silk. We must learn to see clearly, to ask, is this person truly helpless, or are they avoiding responsibility? Are they confused, or are they deflecting? Am I helping them, or being controlled by them? Because sometimes the most dangerous people in the room aren't the ones who demand power. They're the ones we protect without question. Next is a paradox where caring turns into control, care that created dependency. Care is supposed to be healing. When someone cares for you, it signals safety, compassion, and love. To care for another is to support them through pain, to ease their burden, to be present when the world feels unkind. But beneath this noble act lies a complicated and often unspoken paradox. Sometimes, the more someone cares for you, the more they prevent you from growing. Their care, while soothing, begins to create a quiet form of dependency. And in the name of helping, they slowly take away your strength. This paradox doesn't emerge from cruelty. It comes from good intentions. A parent who ties their child's shoes every day just wants to help. A friend who always fixes your problems is trying to show up. A partner who constantly reassures you isn't trying to control you. They just want you to feel loved. But when care becomes overcare, it crosses an invisible line. Instead of supporting someone's independence, it starts to substitute for it. The person receiving this kind of care begins to internalize a message they may not even recognize. You can't do this on your own. They become used to leaning, not walking. And as time passes, their own skills, confidence, and resilience begin to wither. They defer decisions, avoid challenges, and begin to seek permission rather than make choices. Not because they're weak, but because they've been cared for so deeply that the muscle of autonomy was never allowed to fully develop. On the surface, it looks like love, but deep down, it feels like a cage. The paradox becomes sharper when the one offering care begins to derive identity from it. They become the one who's always there, the fixer, the emotional support system. And once this role solidifies, letting go becomes terrifying. If the person they care for no longer needs them, who are they? What is their worth? So, unconsciously, they keep the other person just dependent enough, always offering help, always stepping in, never truly stepping back. It's not dominance in the traditional sense. It's control through compassion. This is most clearly seen in certain parent-child relationships. A parent may do everything for their child out of love, manage their emotions, solve their disputes, handle every setback. But in doing so, they inadvertently raise someone who doesn't know how to navigate life alone. Then, when the child struggles as an adult, the parent's initial care becomes the source of the problem. Not because they didn't love enough, but because they loved too much in the wrong way. In romantic partnerships, this dynamic can quietly erode intimacy. One partner becomes the caretaker, always checking in, anticipating needs, absorbing emotional labor. At first, it feels nurturing, but over time, it becomes imbalanced. The cared-for partner begins to rely on their counterpart for emotional regulation, decision-making, even basic self-esteem. Meanwhile, the caretaker starts to feel burdened, trapped in a role they created. They may grow resentful, but still can't let go. Why? Because the dependency affirms their value. There's also a societal version of this paradox. Governments, charities, and institutions sometimes offer care that breeds dependence. They provide just enough resources to keep people afloat, but not enough to help them build sustainable lives. Assistance becomes routine, but upward mobility remains out of reach. Those receiving the care feel grateful, but also stuck. Those providing it feel virtuous, but also powerful. And in this silent exchange, independence is quietly stolen under the banner of support. Even in friendships, this can happen. One friend always listens, always gives advice, always shows up. They care, but they never allow space for the other to grow into their own strength. The friendship revolves around one being the nurturer, the other being nurtured. And if that dynamic ever shifts, the relationship may fall apart, not because of conflict, but because the roles no longer function. What makes this paradox so difficult to address is that it feels good at first. Being cared for can be comforting, even addictive. It relieves responsibility. It reduces fear. It offers a kind of emotional sedation that makes the world seem less overwhelming. But the cost is high. Over time, dependency erodes self-trust. The person begins to believe they are incapable of surviving without the one who cares for them. And once that belief takes root, it becomes self-fulfilling. To care for someone truly, you must be willing to let them fail. You must step back, even when it hurts. You must allow discomfort, risk, and struggle. Because real care empowers. It doesn't shield forever. It teaches the person to stand, not to cling. The paradox of care that creates dependency is not a condemnation of love. It's a challenge to deepen it. To love someone is not just to protect them. It's to believe in their strength, even when they don't. It's to support without controlling, to nurture without weakening, to offer your presence without making it a crutch. Because when care becomes captivity, it's no longer compassion, it's fear disguised as love. Next is a paradox where peace comes at a steep cost. Peace that came from control. Peace is often seen as the highest aspiration of the human spirit. From personal relationships to entire nations, the promise of peace is the driving force behind compromise, treaties, and healing. We equate peace with harmony, calm, safety. It's a state we long for when chaos takes over, a balm for the noise of life. But there's a darker version of peace that most people never talk about. A peace that isn't the result of balance or understanding, but of silence, suppression, and control. And that's the paradox. Some of the most peaceful environments are not peaceful at all. They are simply well-managed illusions, maintained by control rather than connection. You see this in households where peace means never raising your voice, where children are taught to stay quiet, where conflict is avoided at all costs, and where surface calm hides emotional distance. It looks like a stable home, but underneath, there's fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of disruption. The peace exists not because issues are resolved, but because they're never allowed to surface. In these environments, control masquerades as peace. It happens in relationships too. One partner may constantly give in to avoid confrontation. They silence their preferences, bury their needs, keep the mood light. The other partner believes things are going smoothly, but in reality, the relationship is lopsided. There's no conflict, not because they agree on everything, but because one person has learned that harmony is only preserved through self-erasure. Their inner world becomes a battleground of restraint, and that restraint is what maintains the illusion of peace. This same dynamic plays out in workplaces and institutions. Leaders maintain a calm, controlled culture where disagreement is discouraged and compliance is mistaken for unity. There's no visible tension. Everyone nods. Everyone agrees. But beneath the surface is resentment, disengagement, and fear of speaking out. The system punishes disruption and rewards silence, so people keep their real thoughts to themselves, and peace is achieved through conformity, not connection. At its core, this kind of peace isn't peace at all. It's stagnation. It's what happens when discomfort is exiled rather than explored. True peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the resolution of it. It's the product of understanding, mutual respect, and growth. But when peace is rooted in control, it becomes brittle. It depends on obedience. It depends on the constant maintenance of a narrative where everything looks okay, even when it isn't. This paradox becomes even more dangerous when applied to larger systems of power. Governments have long pursued peace by clamping down on dissent. They justify surveillance, censorship, and authoritarian control as necessary tools for preserving order. Citizens are told they're safe, but only if they comply. The streets are quiet, but not because the people are content, because they're afraid. That's not peace. That's domination under the guise of stability. Even in spiritual or philosophical communities, peace is sometimes treated as a performance. Positive vibes only becomes a way to shut down grief, anger, or questioning. People are encouraged to smile, to let go, to move on, regardless of what they're actually feeling. The desire for peace turns into a refusal to engage with pain. And those who challenge the illusion are labeled as toxic or negative. Once again, the peace survives, but only by suppressing the human experience. The root of this paradox lies in how deeply people fear conflict. Conflict feels threatening. It's unpredictable. It requires vulnerability, communication, effort. Control, by contrast, feels safe. It allows us to predict outcomes, manage behavior, and avoid messiness. So when faced with the choice, many people choose the comfort of control over the risk of real peace. They enforce harmony through avoidance and convince themselves that absence of struggle means all is well. But this kind of peace always comes at a cost. The person who keeps quiet to avoid confrontation loses themselves. The community that silences dissent loses progress. The government that outlaws criticism loses its humanity. And eventually, the illusion breaks. The repressed feelings boil over. The controlled peace fractures. And what's revealed is not just the anger or pain that was hidden, but the immense effort it took to pretend none of it existed. True peace is hard. It requires confrontation. It requires letting people speak, even when what they say is uncomfortable. It means letting your partner disagree with you, letting your child cry and express frustration, letting your employees or citizens push back. Real peace is not built through dominance. It's earned through dialogue. To recognize this paradox in your own life is to ask a simple but terrifying question. Is this peace or is this control? Am I calm because I'm free or because I'm afraid to speak? Are things quiet because we're connected or because we're avoiding everything that matters? Because peace built on suppression is a ticking clock, and when it breaks, it leaves behind more damage than any storm ever could. Next is a paradox where honesty becomes a weapon. Truth that destroyed unity. Truth is sacred. It's what we're taught to seek, to speak, to stand for. It is the foundation of trust, progress, and justice. In a world clouded by lies, the truth is supposed to cut through the fog and reveal clarity. But what happens when truth, rather than uniting people, becomes the wedge that tears them apart? This is the paradox. The very thing meant to bring us together, truth, can just as easily destroy the bonds we thought were unbreakable. The idea that truth always heals is a comforting illusion. In reality, truth is often disruptive. It doesn't arrive gently. It shatters illusions, reopens wounds, and forces people to confront what they've worked hard to ignore. In families, the truth about abuse, betrayal, or long-buried secrets can dismantle generations of silence. In friendships, a single honest confession can end years of closeness. In communities, a truth revealed about one member can ripple outward and fracture the entire group. Not because the truth was wrong, but because the unity they shared was built on something fragile, something false. We often confuse unity with peace, but unity built on shared denial isn't strength. It's a ticking bomb, and when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't always free people. Sometimes it devastates them. It breaks their image of someone they loved. It rewrites the history they held dear. It forces them to question not just what happened, but who they are. When truth destabilizes identity, people don't thank you for it. They reject it. They attack it. They blame the truth teller, not the lie. That's part of what makes this paradox so painful. Telling the truth can make you the villain in someone else's story. You may reveal the truth with the best intentions, to set someone free, to bring clarity, but instead, you're met with rage, silence, or exile. The truth didn't unite. It broke what people were clinging to. And now you're the reason everything fell apart. This happens often in whistleblowing. A person steps forward to reveal corruption or injustice, expecting to be supported. Instead, they're ostracized. Not because what they said wasn't true, but because it threatened the system's illusion of integrity. Organizations, families, even entire governments will sacrifice the truth teller to preserve the myth. The group bonds more tightly around the lie, using the rupture as a reason to deepen denial. Unity remains, but only through rejection of the truth. There's also a brutal simplicity to how people use truth as a weapon. Not all truth tellers are noble. Some use honesty to hurt, to shame, to dominate. I'm just being real, they say, before delivering something cruel and unnecessary. I speak the truth, they insist, as if truth alone excuses the impact. But truth without compassion is not justice. It's aggression wrapped in righteousness. And when that kind of truth enters a space, it doesn't foster understanding. It burns bridges. It divides. This is where the paradox deepens. Truth, even when spoken with care, cannot guarantee unity. Because unity requires shared willingness to face discomfort. And many people don't want truth. They want comfort, familiarity, control. When faced with truths that challenge their worldview, they retreat, rebel, or rally against it. Families exile the relative who speaks up. Political parties reject members who question the narrative. Friendships dissolve when honesty touches a nerve. In every case, truth becomes the villain, not because it was false, but because it was unwelcome. And yet this doesn't mean truth should be silenced. It means we must approach it with reverence. Truth is not a hammer to slam into people's lives. It's a light, and sometimes that light is blinding. If you shine it too fast, too intensely, people will shield their eyes and curse you for hurting them. But if you never shine it, they remain in the dark, chained to illusions. So the question is not whether to speak the truth, but how, when, and why. It's also crucial to ask whether the truth you're sharing is about connection or control. Are you revealing it to heal or to win? Are you offering clarity or asserting superiority? Because truth, when shared without love, becomes a tool of ego, and that too can destroy unity, not because the facts are wrong, but because the delivery poisons the intent. Ultimately, the paradox of truth that destroyed unity is not an argument against honesty, it's a warning about its power. Truth is not gentle. It tears away illusions, it exposes shadows. And sometimes, people are not ready. Sometimes, they'll cling to the lie because it feels safer, cleaner, easier to live with. They will turn against the one who spoke what no one else dared to. But unity built on lies isn't unity. It's mutual silence. So tell the truth. But know that in doing so, you may lose the very people you hoped would understand you. And yet, in that loss, something real begins. something solid, a life that no longer requires you to pretend. Next is a paradox, where compassion enables harm. Compassion that enabled abuse. Compassion is often revered as the most noble of human emotions, the instinct to feel for others, to care, to forgive, to understand even when it's difficult. It is what binds us in times of suffering and lifts us when we fall. We are told to be compassionate, to give second chances, to soften our judgments and see the pain behind the anger, the trauma behind the cruelty. But what happens when compassion is offered so freely, so unconditionally, that it allows harm to continue unchecked? This is the paradox. The more compassionate we are, the more we may become complicit in the very abuse we wish to prevent. Compassion asks us to see the humanity in others, even when they hurt us, and that can be powerful. It can turn enemies into allies, repair damaged relationships, and break cycles of vengeance. But when compassion ignores accountability, when it overrides self-protection, it transforms from a virtue into a vulnerability. A person may stay in a toxic relationship, endlessly forgiving emotional wounds, because they understand their partner's trauma. They've had a hard life, they say. They're trying. And yet, the harm continues. Each act of compassion becomes another layer of justification for abuse. This is especially dangerous in dynamics where the abuser is skilled at evoking pity. Many abusers are not loud monsters. They're wounded people who know how to cry, how to apologize, how to present themselves as the victim. They paint their behavior as a result of stress, fear, past betrayal. And the compassionate person, trained to empathize, absorbs it all. They lower their guard. They excuse. They stay. Not because they don't see the harm, but because they believe they're helping to heal it. That's the trap. Compassion can become a chain. You begin to believe that walking away is cruelty, that enforcing boundaries is heartless, that protecting yourself means abandoning someone who's already suffering. So you stay quiet. You give more chances. You hope your love will fix them. But love isn't therapy, and compassion is not a cure for someone who refuses to change. This paradox appears not just in personal relationships, but in communities and institutions. Religious groups may shield abusive leaders in the name of forgiveness. Families may sweep predatory behavior under the rug to keep the peace. Schools, workplaces, and governments often choose to rehabilitate offenders quietly instead of protecting the vulnerable publicly. Why? Because compassion for the abuser outweighs justice for the abused. The system fears appearing harsh, so it chooses softness, and in doing so, enables harm. Even therapists and healers can fall into this trap. They may over-identify with a client's pain, allowing behavior that crosses ethical lines. They may avoid difficult conversations, fearing that truth will break the fragile trust they've built. Their compassion becomes a shield, not for the client, but for themselves, to avoid discomfort. The result: unchallenged patterns that reinforce suffering instead of resolving it. At the societal level, this paradox becomes even more complex. Compassionate criminal justice reform, for instance, seeks to rehabilitate rather than punish, and often rightly so. But when compassion is extended without structure or accountability, repeat harm becomes possible. Victims are re-traumatized, communities lose faith, and justice feels hollow. Compassion must be paired with boundaries. Without them, it becomes permission. There's also an internal version of this paradox. We extend compassion to others, but not to ourselves. We excuse those who hurt us, but punish ourselves for being angry, for wanting distance, for saying no. We call it kindness, but really it's fear. Fear of being selfish, fear of being cold, fear of being the villain. So we absorb the pain, convincing ourselves that tolerance is strength. But compassion is not martyrdom. It is not self-erasure. It must include you too. One of the most painful aspects of this paradox is that the more compassionate person often carries the emotional labor of the entire relationship. They manage the moods, apologize first, regulate the tension. They forgive again and again, believing that love will be enough. But it rarely is, because if compassion is one-sided, it becomes a breeding ground for imbalance. One person grows heavier with pain, the other lighter with freedom, and the longer it goes on, the more normalized it becomes. So how do we escape this paradox without hardening into bitterness? By understanding that real compassion has limits. True empathy doesn't mean accepting everything. It means choosing wisely. It means distinguishing between someone who is struggling and trying, and someone who is struggling and using that struggle to harm others. It means asking not just how do they feel, but also what are they doing with that feeling? It also means remembering that protecting yourself is not cruelty. Saying no is not betrayal. Leaving someone who won't stop hurting you is not a failure of compassion. It's the beginning of healing for both of you. Compassion without boundaries is not virtue, it's surrender. And when you give all your softness to someone who only grows sharper in return, you are not helping them. You are enabling the very harm they must one day face. Next is a paradox where support becomes rivalry. Friendship that was competition. Friendship is supposed to be the space where competition ends. It's the refuge from comparison, the relationship where success isn't threatening and vulnerability isn't dangerous. A true friend is someone who roots for you, who celebrates your wins as their own and stands by you through failure without keeping score. But for many, especially in adulthood, friendship comes with an undercurrent that no one wants to name. A quiet rivalry, a measuring of lives, an invisible contest of who's doing better. This is the paradox. A bond built on support slowly becomes a subtle battlefield for self-worth. It rarely starts with hostility. It begins with admiration. You see your friend's confidence, their relationship, their career, and you feel proud at first. But then the comparison creeps in. They got promoted. You're still figuring things out. They're traveling the world. You're stuck in routines. They're glowing on social media while you're battling self-doubt in silence. And suddenly, their joy no longer feels inspiring. It feels like pressure, like judgment, like you're falling behind. But you smile, you clap, you tell them how happy you are for them, and a part of you means it. Yet another part flinches every time their life shines a little brighter than yours. You don't wish them failure, but their success becomes a mirror reflecting everything you haven't done. That's when friendship becomes emotionally exhausting, not because they've changed, but because you can't help measuring yourself next to them. This kind of rivalry is rarely spoken aloud. It remains hidden under layers of warmth and inside jokes. But the signs are there. You withhold good news because you don't want to make them feel bad, or because you fear they won't celebrate you the way you need. You feel a flash of relief when they stumble, not out of malice, but because it momentarily closes the gap between you. Or you find yourself overcompensating, exaggerating your happiness just to keep pace. It's a silent scorecard, and both of you are keeping it, even if you never admit it. In some friendships, this paradox becomes toxic. One friend subtly undermines the other, masking criticism as concern. Are you sure you're ready for that promotion? Wow, that's a big step. I hope it works out. Support is replaced with veiled doubt. Advice becomes competition in disguise. Every success is met with one-upping, every vulnerability with dismissal. These dynamics can erode trust over time, turning what should be a safe space into a minefield of emotional insecurity. But even in friendships that appear healthy, competition can live quietly in the background. Social media amplifies it. We compare curated snapshots, vacations, bodies, weddings, achievements, and forget that behind each post is a real flawed person. Friends start becoming brands, lives become performances, and every post becomes a subtle declaration of value. Look at what I've done. Look at who I am. Even if you love them deeply, part of you is still calculating, am I doing enough? Am I enough? This paradox is especially common among those who grew up associating achievement with love. If your worth was tied to performance, friendship becomes another arena for proving yourself. You can't just be friends. You need to be the better friend. The more successful one, the more admired. And when you feel like you're falling behind, the shame doesn't just hurt. It isolates. You pull away not because you don't love them, but because being near them reminds you of your perceived inadequacies. Ironically, these feelings often go both ways. The friend you envy may be envying you. They might see your stability, your kindness, your creativity, and feel small in its shadow. They might be smiling through their own sense of not enoughness, clapping for your wins while wondering why they feel left behind. Both of you wear masks of happiness, hoping the other doesn't see the quiet pain beneath. So what breaks this paradox? Honesty. Not just about your struggles, but about the feelings no one wants to admit. Jealousy, insecurity, fear of being outshined. These emotions don't make you a bad friend. They make you human. And the moment you speak them aloud, the power they hold begins to weaken. Sometimes I compare myself to you, and I hate that I do. But I love you, and I want to be free of it. That kind of vulnerability can melt years of silent tension. It transforms rivalry back into connection. Friendship isn't about perfection. It's about space. Space to be real, to stumble, to shine, to share. A true friend doesn't just cheer for your wins. They sit with your shame, and they don't weaponize your success. They honor it without forgetting their own value. Because real friendship has no scoreboard. There is no race, no gold medal, no finish line. Just two people walking side by side. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, but always choosing to walk together. Next is a paradox where strength is born from wounds, strength that came from pain. We admire strength. The people who rise after falling, the ones who endure heartbreak, trauma, illness, betrayal, and somehow keep going. We celebrate them in books, in films, in our lives. They're so strong, we say, sometimes with awe, sometimes with envy. But what we rarely acknowledge is the cost of that strength. Because it often doesn't come from talent or training or choice. It comes from pain, from suffering, from wounds that never quite healed. And that is the paradox. The strength we admire most is often built from the very pain we would never wish on anyone. Pain transforms people. It strips away illusions. It forces you to dig deeper than you ever thought possible. Not to become wise, but simply to survive. The one who grew up in chaos learned to stay calm under pressure. The one who was abandoned became fiercely independent. The one who lost everything developed an unshakable will. We see their strength and think, how did they become like that? But behind that power is a past full of moments they never chose. And here's where the paradox tightens. The pain that created their strength also left scars. That independence might come with isolation. That calmness might be emotional numbness. That willpower might be an inability to ask for help. The strength becomes both a gift and a defense. A beautiful armor that hides the wound it was forged to protect. This duality is rarely visible. Most people don't see the cost. They just see the resilience, the competence, the control. They go to the strong friend when they're falling apart. They lean on the sibling who always seems okay. They turn to the partner who holds it all together. And the strong person shows up. Because that's what they do. That's what they had to do. But no one asks where that strength came from. No one asks how tired they are. Even the strong begin to believe their identity is fixed. They don't. Let themselves feel weak, because weakness feels like regression. They don't cry openly, because someone once punished them for it. They don't fall apart, because no one ever put them back together. Strength becomes their currency, their safety, their prison. And the deeper the pain that built it, the harder it becomes to let it go. Sometimes the world reinforces this paradox, cruelly. People praise strength while contributing to the pain that sustains it. The woman who keeps forgiving toxic behavior is seen as patient. The man who hides his grief is called stoic. The child who endures dysfunction without complaint is labeled mature for their age. In each case, the strength is real, but it's mistaken for peace, for balance, for choice. It isn't. It's survival in a costume. There's also a strange guilt that can grow within this paradox. The strong person knows their strength came from darkness. They're proud of who they became, but ashamed of how they got there. And when people compliment their resilience, it stings. Because to be proud of the strength is to feel like they're justifying the pain. And to condemn the pain is to question the strength they now rely on. It's a loop with no easy exit. What complicates this further is that society needs strong people, but often forgets to care for them. We assume they're fine. We give them more to carry. We mistake their silence for serenity, and when they finally break, people are shocked. But they were doing so well. No, they were just good at surviving. The truth is, pain does teach. It forces growth. It reveals the edge of your limits and sometimes pushes you past them. Many of the wisest, kindest, most grounded people you know were shaped by their suffering. But that doesn't mean pain should be glorified. Trauma is not a teacher anyone should have to sit through. Not all strength is worth the price it demanded. So what do we do with this paradox? We start by honoring the cost. When someone shows strength, we ask where it came from. We stop assuming they're fine because they always have been. We offer softness to the ones who seem least in need of it, because those are often the ones who need it most. And for those living inside the paradox themselves, it's about unlearning the belief that strength means never being vulnerable again. You can be strong and still cry, still ask for help, still admit when you're struggling. Strength isn't about invulnerability, it's about persistence. It's about showing up, yes, but also about knowing when to rest. True strength doesn't mean denying the pain that shaped you. It means integrating it, making peace with it, and refusing to let it define your future. Because the paradox will always remain. Pain can make you strong, but healing will make you free. Next is a paradox where loyalty silences justice. Loyalty. That silence justice. Loyalty is a virtue held in the highest regard across cultures, families, and relationships. We praise those who stand by their loved ones through adversity, who stay committed when things get hard, who defend their tribe no matter what. Loyalty is framed as honor, as integrity, as the glue that holds human connection together. But hidden within this devotion is a dangerous and often invisible paradox. Sometimes, the more loyal we are, the more we contribute to injustice. Not by committing it, but by refusing to speak against it, by staying silent, by staying loyal. Loyalty is beautiful when it aligns with what's right. But when loyalty collides with truth, ethics, or conscience, it forces a choice, and many choose the bond over the principle. A friend makes a cruel remark, and we laugh uncomfortably instead of calling it out. A sibling hurts someone, and we defend them because they're family. A respected leader crosses a line, but we protect their reputation because of all the good they've done. Loyalty becomes a shield, not for the vulnerable, but for the powerful, and that shield can block justice from ever arriving. This paradox thrives in environments where unity is emphasized over accountability. In families, it's often disguised as not airing dirty laundry. In institutions, it's protecting the brand. In friendships, it's having their back no matter what. These mantras sound noble, but they often silence victims. They create a culture where calling out wrongdoing is seen as betrayal, where questioning authority is labeled disloyal, where speaking the truth becomes the ultimate sin. And in that silence, harm festers. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this paradox is how often loyalty is used to manipulate. Abusers frequently invoke it to isolate and control. Don't tell anyone, or you'll ruin everything. If you really loved me, you'd stay quiet. You owe me this. In these moments, loyalty is twisted into complicity. The person being asked to stay silent isn't protecting love. They're protecting power. And often they know something is wrong. But the fear of being seen as a traitor, of breaking the unspoken code, keeps them quiet. This dynamic is particularly potent in groups with strong in-group identities, families, political movements, religious institutions. The more people identify with the group, the more pressure they feel to defend it at all costs. Even when a group member commits harm, the instinct is to close ranks, to minimize, to excuse. They made a mistake, but they're one of us. Let's handle this privately. Justice becomes a threat, not to the values of the group, but to its reputation. But justice isn't optional. It doesn't go away just because you pretend nothing happened. It doesn't dissolve because the person who caused harm is someone you love. And that's what makes this paradox so painful. Loyalty tells you that standing by someone means shielding them from consequences. Justice tells you that true loyalty is holding them accountable. there's also a personal toll. Those who stay silent out of loyalty often carry guilt, confusion, and self-betrayal. They know what's happening isn't right, but they're caught in an emotional conflict. Speak up and risk losing someone they love, or stay silent and lose a piece of themselves. Over time, this tension corrodes the soul. They start to doubt their own moral compass. They feel complicit. They suffer in the name of loyalty, and no one even knows. In friendships, this paradox can destroy trust. One person might tolerate bad behavior from the other, thinking that's what loyalty means. Never walking away, never confronting, always forgiving. But real friendship isn't built on blind allegiance. It's built on honesty, respect, and the ability to challenge each other without fear. A friend who never tells you the truth isn't protecting you. They're protecting their comfort. In families, the silence can last generations. Secrets are buried, abuse is denied, and those who try to speak out are ostracized. How dare you bring shame on the family, they're told, as if the shame is in the exposure, not in the act itself. In these cases, loyalty doesn't preserve love. It preserves dysfunction. And yet loyalty can still be beautiful when it walks hand in hand with justice, when you stay by someone's side and hold them accountable, when you speak the truth, not to destroy them, but to help them become better. That kind of loyalty is rare. It requires courage, clarity, and compassion. It doesn't protect harm, it interrupts it. So how do we resolve this paradox? We redefine what loyalty means. Loyalty is not silence. It's not blind defense. It's not sacrificing your integrity for someone else's comfort. True loyalty is rooted in truth. It's the willingness to risk discomfort for the sake of what's right. It's saying, I love you, but this isn't okay. It's believing that relationships can survive confrontation and may even grow stronger because of it. Because when loyalty silences justice, no one wins. The victim remains unheard, the perpetrator remains unchallenged, and the loyal one slowly erodes from within. Next is a paradox where protection becomes possession. Helpfulness that became oppression. Helping others is one of the most celebrated human impulses. It's seen as kindness in action, a willingness to give time, energy, and support for the benefit of someone else. From childhood, we're taught to be helpful, to assist those who are struggling, to offer advice when someone's lost, to step in when someone seems overwhelmed. But sometimes help crosses a line. Sometimes it stops being about support and starts being about control. That's the paradox. The more helpful someone becomes, the more likely they are to dominate. And in the name of care, they slowly take away freedom. At first, it feels like generosity. A friend anticipates your needs before you even voice them. A parent steps in before their child has a chance to struggle. A partner offers constant guidance, just trying to help. But over time, something subtle begins to shift. The person being helped doesn't feel supported. They feel smothered, disempowered. Their voice is drowned out by well-meaning instructions. Their independence is quietly eroded. This type of help is rarely malicious. It's often rooted in a love, worry, or a desire to fix. But that's what makes it so insidious. The helper believes they're doing something good. They don't realize that their constant involvement is sending a message. I don't believe you can handle this without me. And the person receiving that message again and again starts to believe it too. This paradox is especially prevalent in relationships with power imbalances. Parent to child, teacher to student, manager to employee. The person in the helper role holds more knowledge, more experience, more authority, and when they overextend their help, they can unintentionally reinforce dependence. A child who's never allowed to make mistakes doesn't learn resilience. An employee who's micromanaged stops taking initiative. The help, rather than empowering, becomes a leash. Even in equal relationships, like friendships or romantic partnerships, this dynamic can sneak in. One person becomes the designated fixer. They solve every problem, manage every detail, offer unsolicited advice with good intentions, but the balance tips. The other person begins to feel like a project, not a partner. Their decisions are constantly second-guessed. Their autonomy dissolves under the weight of relentless assistance. It's not support anymore. It's quiet domination. The root of this paradox often lies in the helper's own anxiety. They can't bear to watch someone struggle. They fear failure, not just for themselves, but for the other person. Helping becomes a way to manage their own discomfort. But when help is driven by fear rather than trust, it stops being about the other person's needs. It becomes about the helper's need to feel secure, needed, or in control. There's also an ego component. Being helpful feels good. It creates a sense of purpose, of moral superiority. You become the wise one, the capable one, the generous one. But over time, that identity can harden. The helper begins to need the other person to stay helpless because it validates their role. Their value is tied to being needed, so they might, without realizing it, undermine the other person's growth, offer too much, intervene too early, frame independence as a threat rather than a success. This happens in systems as well. Institutions that claim to help the vulnerable often end up controlling them. Bureaucracies set up endless rules for protection. Charities dictate how aid should be used. Governments implement policies that reduce people's ability to choose their own paths, all under the banner of service. But true help is not about taking over. It's about stepping back. It's about asking, what do you need? Instead of declaring, here's what's best for you. To the person on the receiving end of oppressive helpfulness, the experience can be deeply confusing. They may feel guilty for resenting help. They may struggle to assert themselves without feeling ungrateful. After all, the helper is being nice. But niceness is not the same as respect. And help that doesn't make space for autonomy is not a gift. It's a form of control. This dynamic can be especially painful when it happens. In close relationships, the child who grows into an adult and still feels like they can't make choices without their parents' input. The partner who starts avoiding conversation because every topic becomes a lecture. The friend who stops sharing struggles because they don't want another round of solutions. In each case, the helper believes they're being supportive, but the effect is silencing, infantilizing, and ultimately oppressive. So how do we break this paradox? By understanding that true help starts with humility. It begins by asking, not assuming, by listening, not lecturing, by trusting the other person's capacity to struggle, to fail, to grow. Helping doesn't mean removing the challenge. It means walking beside someone as they face it. And sometimes, it means not helping at all. We must also be willing to let go of our own discomfort, to let people make mistakes, to let things be messy, because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in friction, in trying, in stumbling, forward on your own feet. Help should never shrink someone's world. it should expand it. Because when helpfulness becomes oppression, it doesn't lift someone up, it holds them down. Next is a paradox, where honesty demands dishonesty. Honesty that demanded lies. Honesty is a virtue that few would question. It's the bedrock of trust, intimacy, and ethical living. We're taught to speak the truth, to live authentically, to avoid the deceit that corrodes relationships and undermines society. Honesty is framed as moral clarity, as bravery even. But beneath this glowing principle lies an unsettling paradox. Sometimes, the more committed we are to being honest, the more we're forced to lie, to ourselves, to others, or to the very truth we claim to uphold. This isn't the obvious kind of lying. It's not the bold, calculated deception of someone with bad intentions. It's subtler, more insidious. It's the way people who pride themselves on being truth tellers sometimes end up distorting reality to protect that image. They say what's honest in content, but dishonest in spirit. They insist they're just being real, but their truth is selective, sharpened, or weaponized. And when challenged, they retreat behind the shield of honesty, as if truth alone excuses cruelty or distortion. You've probably seen this in your own life. Someone shares a harsh opinion under the guise of being authentic. They reveal painful truths, not because it helps, but because it gives them a sense of moral superiority. They feel justified, invulnerable, because they're being honest. But honesty without compassion, without self-awareness, can become a form of aggression. It can serve ego more than clarity. The paradox deepens when we consider how honesty functions in complex social settings. In relationships, we value transparency, but not all truths are simple, and not all moments are right. Brutal honesty can rupture delicate emotional dynamics. Telling someone you don't love them anymore may be true, but how and when you say it changes everything. Telling a grieving friend you hated their deceased parent may be true, but it may also be unnecessary, selfish, or cruel. So we learn to lie gently. We soften truths. We delay them. We dress them in empathy. Not because we're dishonest, but because unfiltered honesty can do real damage. There's also a version of this paradox in self-honesty. We tell ourselves we're being truthful about our motives, our past, our feelings. But that honesty often has blind spots. People committed to being honest with themselves sometimes rewrite memories to protect their identity. They frame past choices in ways that cast them as noble, even when they were confused or afraid. They tell themselves half-truths to avoid discomfort. In trying to live authentically, they become trapped by their own narrative. The more they insist they know the truth, the less they examine whether that truth is complete. This is especially common in people who define themselves by integrity. I'm always honest, they say. I don't lie. But the pressure to live up to that ideal can lead them to conceal any thought or behavior that might contradict it. They lie to maintain their image of honesty. They hide doubts, mistakes, complexities. And so, the paradox emerges. The more someone believes they are honest, the harder it becomes to admit anything that might challenge that belief. In certain professions or social roles, this becomes even more pronounced. Therapists, leaders, spiritual guides. People look to them for clarity and truth. But these roles often come with unspoken expectations. You must always appear wise, grounded, clear. So when doubt or contradiction arises, many lie. If not in words, then in performance. They present confidence when they're unsure. They offer answers when they feel lost, all in the name of honesty, of staying true to their role. But it's still a lie. Social norms also complicate the paradox. We live in a world that encourages honesty, but punishes it when it's too raw. Say how you really feel in a meeting, and you risk being labeled difficult. Express a politically incorrect opinion, even thoughtfully, and you risk isolation. Share an uncomfortable truth with your partner, and you may rupture trust, even if it was never your intention. So people learn to lie, not because they want to deceive, but because the social cost of honesty is sometimes too high. And yet, we still revere honesty. We still chase it. Because without it, everything feels fake. So how do we live honestly, without becoming dishonest in the process? We start by understanding that honesty isn't just about facts, it's about intention. Are you speaking the truth to illuminate or to dominate? Are you being real or are you being righteous? Are you telling the truth because it needs to be told or because it makes you feel powerful to say it? We must also make space for uncertainty. The most honest people are often the ones who admit what they don't know. They revise their opinions. They acknowledge contradictions. They're not trapped in a performance of truth. They live in the messy, shifting world where truth evolves. That kind of honesty doesn't demand lies to protect itself. It embraces imperfection. Because real honesty isn't loud. It's not sharp. It's quiet, humble, often incomplete. And it never demands lies to survive. Next is a paradox where forgiveness fuels repetition. Forgiveness that fed repetition. Forgiveness is seen as a higher path, a noble act of letting go, of rising above, of releasing pain so healing can begin. From religion to psychology, we're taught that forgiveness is a sign of strength, not weakness. It's the antidote to resentment, the gateway to peace. But beneath its glowing reputation lies a troubling paradox. Sometimes, the more we forgive, the more we enable harm to repeat. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't heal. It resets the cycle. At the heart of forgiveness is the idea of release. When you absolve someone of wrongdoing, you choose not to seek revenge, you offer them another chance. That choice can be transformative, especially when it's paired with accountability, reflection, and real change. But when forgiveness is offered too quickly, too freely, or without boundaries, it becomes a loophole, a way for someone to harm, apologize, and then resume the same behavior, knowing that your forgiveness will be waiting. This dynamic is painfully common in personal relationships. A partner lies, cheats, explodes in anger, but they say they're sorry, they cry, they promise to do better, and out of love or fear or hope, the other person forgives them. Again and again, the behavior repeats, and the apologies become rehearsed. Over time, forgiveness becomes a script, not a solution. The one forgiving begins to feel trapped in their own kindness. They wonder if they're compassionate or just being used. The paradox becomes more dangerous when the person being forgiven starts to believe there are no real consequences. They may begin to rely on forgiveness as a tool of manipulation. As long as they say the right words, express enough remorse, they can reset the damage. They don't have to change, just repent convincingly. And often, the forgiver, caught in their belief that mercy is a moral duty, accepts the apology without demanding transformation. Forgiveness also becomes complicated in families, especially where cycles of abuse or emotional neglect have been normalized. Children are taught to forgive parents because they're your blood. Siblings are told to let it go for the sake of unity. But when that forgiveness isn't paired with truth-telling or boundaries, it becomes erasure. The pain never disappears, it just gets swallowed. And those who cause harm learn that no matter what they do, they'll be welcomed back. That's not forgiveness, it's surrender. This paradox extends into culture and society as well. Celebrities, politicians, and public figures apologize after scandals, often receiving forgiveness before real accountability is ever enforced. PR-crafted statements, public tears, and gestures of remorse allow them to rehabilitate their image, while the people affected by their actions are left to carry the fallout. Society's eagerness to forgive is often rooted in its discomfort with conflict. Forgiveness becomes a shortcut to closure, even if the wound is still open. Even institutions fall into this loop. Churches, corporations, or governments issue apologies for past harm, racism, abuse, environmental destruction, while continuing the very behaviors they just apologized for. Forgiveness is sought, but little changes. And when people refuse to forgive, they're labeled bitter, divisive, or unforgiving. The pressure to move on becomes a form of gaslighting. Forgiveness, instead of being a personal choice, becomes a social expectation, a demand, and those who don't comply are shamed. There's also the internal version of this paradox. Some people are so committed to forgiveness that they turn it inward, excusing their own harmful patterns over and over. I didn't mean it. I'll do better next time. They forgive themselves too soon, too often. They skip the difficult work of confronting why they keep repeating the same mistakes. Forgiveness becomes an escape hatch from accountability. Self-compassion, when untethered from self-honesty, can become self-sabotage. This doesn't mean that forgiveness is inherently bad. It means it's more complex than we like to admit. True forgiveness is not just emotional release, it's moral clarity. It's not passive. It demands discernment. It asks, is this person truly sorry? Have they changed? What boundaries are needed to ensure this doesn't happen again? Without these questions, forgiveness can become a quiet accomplice to harm. So, how do we navigate this paradox? By understanding that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. You can forgive someone in your heart and still walk away. You can release anger without inviting them back into your life. You can choose peace without choosing silence. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending. And it certainly doesn't mean allowing the same wounds to be inflicted again and again. Boundaries are not a failure to forgive. They are the conditions in which forgiveness can exist without breeding harm. They draw the line between compassion and compliance. They say, I wish you well, but I no longer make myself available for your harm. We also need to give ourselves permission not to forgive on someone else's timeline. Healing doesn't follow a schedule. Sometimes withholding forgiveness is the most honest thing you can do. It signals that harm was real, that trust was broken, that some wounds don't vanish with an apology, because forgiveness, when rushed, demanded, or performed, becomes a mask, and masks don't protect, they hide. Next is a paradox where selflessness masks a hidden need, selflessness that needed validation. Selflessness is often regarded as the highest form of goodness, to give without expecting anything in return, to put others first, to sacrifice your own comfort, needs, and even happiness for someone else's well-being. It's seen as noble, pure, and deeply virtuous. We celebrate the selfless, the parents who give up everything for their children, the friends who are always there, the partners who love without conditions. But behind this noble ideal lies a paradox few are willing to confront. Sometimes, selflessness isn't as selfless as it seems. Sometimes it's driven by a hidden hunger for validation, for worth, for identity, and the more a person denies their own needs, the more they begin to crave recognition for their sacrifice. At first, it looks like love. A person gives their time, energy, money, attention. They say yes when it's inconvenient. They show up. When no one else does, they endure silently. Everyone admires them. But over time, an emotional undercurrent begins to surface. They feel unappreciated, unseen, even used. They begin to resent the very people they claim to serve. After everything I've done for them, becomes the internal refrain. And suddenly, the selflessness starts to crack. This is the paradox. When selflessness comes from a deep well of insecurity or a desire to be valued, it's not truly about the other person. It's about the giver's identity. Their sense of worth is tied to being needed, being indispensable, being the one who never complains. So they continue to give, not just out of compassion, but because they don't know who they'd be if they stopped. This pattern often forms early in life. Children who had to earn love by being useful, quiet, or helpful often grow into adults who believe their value lies in what they can do for others. They're praised for being mature beyond their years. But what they learned was how to suppress their own needs. As adults, they become the caretakers, the overfunctioners, the emotional sponges for everyone around them. And while they may seem calm and generous on the outside, inside they're often exhausted, lonely, and quietly desperate for someone to return the care they give so freely. The tragedy is that these people rarely feel allowed to ask for what they need. They believe that asking diminishes the goodness of their giving. They think true love means expecting nothing. So when the validation doesn't come, when others fail to notice their sacrifices, they don't speak up. They spiral. The resentment builds. And instead of setting boundaries, they push themselves further, hoping someone will eventually see them. But invisibility, once accepted, rarely gets reversed by more self-sacrifice. It deepens. In relationships, this creates emotional imbalance. The selfless partner constantly accommodates, compromises, and gives. But over time, they begin to feel like a ghost. Their desires go unspoken. Their preferences disappear. The other partner may not even realize what's happening because the selfless person is so practiced at hiding it. But eventually, the imbalance shows up in other ways. Passive aggression, burnout, emotional withdrawal. And then comes the explosion. The selfless one breaks down, seemingly out of nowhere, saying things like, "You don't even see me. You never give me what I give you." The other person is blindsided because the cost of that selflessness was never revealed. Friendships suffer too. The person who's always available starts feeling taken for granted. They expect others to intuit their needs, to match their effort, to reciprocate in kind. But because they never make those needs known, disappointment is inevitable. Their giving was supposed to make them feel valued, but instead, it leaves them feeling empty. Even in work or creative pursuits, this paradox plays out. Someone pours, themselves into helping a cause, a team, a project, but secretly hopes to be seen, to be thanked, to be admired. When the applause doesn't come, they feel invisible, bitter, even betrayed, and yet they told themselves they didn't want anything in return. They lied, not to others, but to themselves. This doesn't make them bad, it makes them human. We all want to be seen. We all want to feel like we matter. But when those needs are buried under layers of "I'm fine," they don't disappear, they leak out in other ways. They warp our generosity into obligation. They turn love into performance. And they create a cycle where the more we give, the more resentful we become. So how do we break this paradox? By remembering that true selflessness doesn't mean self-erasure. You can give from the heart and still ask to be cared for. You can love someone deeply and still have boundaries. You can be generous and still say, "I need help too." We must also learn to examine our motives. Ask, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I'm afraid I won't be loved if I don't? Am I giving to connect, or to prove that I'm worthy of connection? Because giving, when driven by fear, always demands something in return, even if it's unspoken. True selflessness doesn't need validation, but true humanity does, and there's no shame in that. Next is a paradox where hope becomes a hidden trap. Hope that delayed healing. Hope is often the last thing we cling to when everything else has fallen apart. It's portrayed as light in the darkness, a lifeline in chaos, a reason to keep breathing when the weight of pain becomes unbearable. We're told to hold on to hope, no matter what, to never give up, to believe that better days are coming. But there's a paradox hidden deep within this comforting ideal. Sometimes, the very hope that keeps us going is also the thing that keeps us stuck. Sometimes, hope doesn't heal. It delays healing. It begins subtly. A person stays in a toxic relationship because they believe it will change. They remember the early days, the affection, the laughter, and they hope it will return. Each apology feels like a promise. Each kind gesture a sign of transformation. But weeks turn to months, and months turn to years, and still they wait. Hope becomes the leash that keeps them tethered to pain. And because they believe things might get better, they don't leave, even when everything is screaming that they should. This is the paradox. Hope is future-focused. It places emotional investment in what could be instead of what is. It encourages endurance, which is sometimes necessary. But when the present is filled with evidence that things won't change, hope can morph into denial. It keeps us in situations, jobs, relationships, and patterns that have long since stopped serving us, because we believe that if we just wait a little longer, everything will fix itself. You see this in families too. A child hopes that one day, a distant or abusive parent will apologize, offer the love they've withheld for years, so they keep showing up, keep calling, keep trying. The parent may give crumbs, just enough to reignite the belief, but the healing never comes. The cycle repeats. The child, now an adult, is caught between the ache of what never was and the fantasy of what could still be. And as long as they stay suspended in hope, they never truly grieve what they lost. They never allow the wound to close. Hope can also be paralyzing in the face of failure. Someone stuck in a creative rut, career stagnation, or emotional burnout might continue to push forward, not because they're thriving, but because they hope that all the pain and effort will eventually pay off. They fear stopping, afraid that letting go of hope is the same as giving up. But sometimes, letting go is the beginning of real healing. Not a surrender of dreams, but an acceptance of truth. Hope without reflection can turn into an emotional treadmill, running endlessly, never arriving. There's a deeper reason why this happens. Hope protects us from despair. When the reality of a situation is too painful to fully accept, hope becomes a buffer. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems. Maybe tomorrow will be different. These thoughts give us something to hold on to, but they also delay the hard work of facing what's actually happening. Healing requires confrontation. It asks us to name the loss, the betrayal, the failure. And hope, while beautiful, can postpone that confrontation indefinitely. In some cases, society reinforces this delay. People who express hopelessness are often told, "Don't be negative," or "everything happens for a reason." These phrases, meant to uplift, can actually silence. They suggest that hope is the only acceptable response to pain, that to question it is to invite darkness. But healing doesn't grow in forced optimism. It grows in truth, in the raw, uncomfortable reality of what is, not what we wish it were. There's also a moral dimension to the paradox. People often feel guilty for letting go of hope. If I give up, what does that say about me? If I stop hoping, am I weak? So they cling harder. They tie their identity to being the one who never stops believing. But there is strength in knowing when to stop. There is courage in saying, "I've waited long enough." And there is profound healing in walking away, not from the dream, but from the damage it caused. This doesn't mean hope is useless. It's essential in many moments of life. It helps people survive illness, rebuild after trauma, and rise from unimaginable losses. But hope must be grounded. It must be tethered to reality, not fantasy. It should inspire action, not delay it. When hope is used as a reason to stay in harm's way, it becomes a trap disguised as salvation. So how do we hold on to hope without letting it hold us back? By learning to distinguish between hope and fantasy. Hope says, "This could improve, but I need to act, adjust, or step away to protect myself." Fantasy says, "If I wait long enough, someone else will change, and everything will work out." One empowers, the other paralyzes. Healing begins when we stop waiting for the perfect version of a person, a job, a life to arrive, and start building something real from the pieces we already have. Hope, in its healthiest form, walks beside truth, not in front of it, because sometimes the most hopeful thing you can do is let go. Next is a paradox where joy hides a haunting guilt. Joy that triggered guilt. Joy is one of life's most cherished experiences. It's what we strive for in our relationships, our work, our dreams. It's the feeling we chase through love, creativity, and connection. We light up at moments of laughter, celebration, relief. We're told to savor these moments, to be present, to let yourself be happy. But for many, joy comes with an unexpected weight, a shadow, a voice that whispers, "You don't deserve this. Be careful, it won't last." This is the paradox. Joy, instead of lifting us, sometimes triggers guilt. And the deeper the joy, the deeper the shame that follows. This guilt isn't always obvious. It doesn't arrive with alarms. It sneaks in after a moment of pure happiness and asks, "Why you? What about everyone else who's still hurting?" You land a job you've dreamed of, and instead of celebrating, you think about the friends who are still unemployed. You fall in love, and you think of someone still grieving a divorce. You feel free, and wonder if you've left someone behind. The joy is real, but it's haunted. This paradox is especially common in people who are highly empathetic. They feel the pain of others so deeply that their own happiness feels like a betrayal. If others are suffering, how can they justify their own peace? So even when something good happens, they don't fully allow themselves to feel it. They smile, but they hold back. They laugh, but they look over their shoulder. They worry that joy makes them selfish or blind. Sometimes, the guilt is rooted in upbringing. Children raised in environments where joy was conditional, where excitement was punished, or where happiness was always followed by punishment, grow into adults who distrust their own joy. They believe that feeling too good means something bad is about to happen, or worse, that they're not allowed to feel good at all. For these individuals, joy isn't relief, it's anxiety in disguise. There's also the guilt that stems from personal history. Someone who has survived trauma or abuse may feel they are no longer entitled to joy. They carry unprocessed shame, and when joy tries to enter, that shame rushes to the surface. You're still broken, it says. You're faking it. And so they sabotage the happiness, not because they don't want it, but because they've been taught that healing must be permanent before they're allowed to feel good. But joy isn't a reward for perfection. It's a human right, even in the middle of mess. In some cultures or families, joy itself is seen as suspicious. Don't get too excited or you'll jinx it. Don't brag. Someone will envy you. Be humble. Keep your blessings quiet. These warnings are meant to protect, but they instill a dangerous idea that joy must be hidden, controlled, moderated, that if you're too happy, you'll invite disaster or resentment. And so generations grow up believing that joy is unsafe. Even survivors' guilt reflects this paradox. A person lives through something others didn't. An accident, a war, a pandemic. And when life begins to feel good again, they're haunted by the question, why me? Why do I get to laugh, to love, to keep going? Their joy becomes a source of torment, not because it's unearned, but because it's contrasted against so much pain. And no amount of rational thinking can quiet that ache. This paradox reveals something profound about human emotion. Feelings don't arrive in isolation. We are rarely just joyful. Our happiness carries traces of sorrow, memory, comparison, and fear. We don't live in clean emotional compartments. We live in contradictions. And joy, perhaps more than any emotion, exposes all the places where we still feel undeserving. So what do we do when joy triggers guilt? We begin by understanding that guilt is not always a signal that we've done something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that we're touching something we've been taught to avoid. Guilt can come from internalized beliefs, not from truth, and those beliefs must be examined. We must also learn to separate joy from injustice. Your happiness doesn't cause someone else's pain. Feeling good doesn't erase the world's suffering. And denying yourself joy doesn't ease another person's burden. In fact, your joy, when grounded in empathy, can become a source of hope. It can remind others that healing is possible, that laughter still exists. Let yourself feel joy without shrinking, without apologizing, without offering disclaimers. You can hold joy and grief at the same time. You can be aware of pain and still dance, still laugh, still breathe deeply into your life. In fact, that's what it means to be human, to make room for it all. Joy is not a betrayal of others. It's a return to yourself. And when joy comes, welcome it. Sit with it. Don't flinch. Let it wash over the parts of you that forgot what light feels like. And if the guilt comes, acknowledge it, but don't obey it, because joy is not the problem. Guilt is not the compass. Next is a paradox where waiting becomes wasting. Patience, that wasted life. Patience is praised as a virtue, a sign of maturity, emotional intelligence, and inner strength. We're taught that patience means wisdom, that to wait, to endure, to delay gratification is to live with intention rather than impulse. Good, things come to those who wait, they say. But what happens when waiting becomes a habit? When the postponement of action becomes a way of life? What happens when patience, rather than being a path to fulfillment, becomes the reason you miss everything? That's the paradox. Patience, when extended too far, stops being a virtue and starts becoming a quiet, passive erosion of time, a way of wasting life without realizing it. At first, it looks responsible. You tell yourself not to rush, to think things through. You wait for the perfect moment to take that trip, start that relationship, launch that project. You keep telling yourself, not yet, soon. And that feels smart, strategic. But then months pass, then years, and the perfect moment never arrives. That's how this paradox hides, behind logic, behind practicality. You convince yourself that patience is the mature choice. And sometimes it is. But sometimes it's fear dressed as wisdom. You're not waiting because the time isn't right. You're waiting because you're scared of failing, of starting, of changing. And patience becomes the excuse you use to stay still. This pattern shows up everywhere. The person who waits to apply for their dream job until they feel 100% qualified, but never feels ready. The artist who delays sharing their work until it's perfect but never finishes. The person who holds off ending a relationship that no longer serves them, telling themselves they just need a little more clarity. But the clarity never comes, only more waiting. In relationships, this paradox is especially haunting. Someone stays with a partner who isn't growing, hoping they'll evolve, become more emotionally available, more kind, more committed, and so they wait. They invest more, try harder, love deeper, believing that patience will be rewarded. But years pass and nothing changes. The life they imagined slips further away, sacrificed on the altar of waiting. Even in self-growth, the same trap appears. I'll start working on myself after this busy season. I'll get therapy when things calm down. I'll pursue what I love when I feel more stable. We delay our transformation in the name of timing, believing that there will be a clearer road ahead. But life rarely offers such clarity. Often, the right moment only exists in hindsight, and what we thought was patience was really avoidance. This paradox becomes even more complex in a world that praises endurance. We applaud those who stay the course, who wait their turn, who suppress urgency in the name of discipline. And while There's value in not giving in to every fleeting desire. There's also danger in romanticizing stillness. Sometimes what looks like discipline is actually fear. Sometimes staying patient is easier than taking responsibility for a decision that might change everything. There's also a social cost. We don't want to appear impatient, impulsive, or reckless. So we perform patience for others. We pretend to be content with stagnation. We nod along with people who say, "Just be patient, things will work out." Even when we feel a fire inside that says, "Move now." That fire is inconvenient. It challenges the narrative of control, so we silence it with the language of virtue. And yet, the cost of misplaced patience is enormous. Opportunities fade, relationships rot, potential goes unexplored. Not because we lacked talent or love or courage, but because we waited too long. We waited for the stars to align, for the green light, for someone else to tell us it's okay to begin. And by the time we realize what we've lost, we call it regret. So how do we escape this paradox? By learning to distinguish between conscious patience and passive waiting. Conscious patience is active. You're preparing, reflecting, aligning your actions with your values. There's a sense of momentum, even in stillness. Passive waiting, on the other hand, is delay without intention. It's the feeling of your life being on hold, of time passing without movement, of dreams gathering dust. You also have to learn to trust your own inner urgency. Not every impulse is a mistake. Sometimes the urge to act isn't immaturity. It's wisdom your mind hasn't caught up with yet. The longing to leave, to start, to leap. These are signals, not sins. And ignoring them in the name of patience doesn't make you noble. It just makes you late. Give yourself permission to act before you're fully ready, to start before everything makes sense. Life rewards movement, not perfection. And sometimes, the only way to find the right path is to start walking, imperfectly, uncertainly, bravely. Patience is powerful, but unchecked, it becomes paralysis. Stillness is sacred, but extended too long, it becomes a cage. And waiting is only wise when it leads to something real, not when it becomes the reason your life never began. Next is a paradox where resilience slowly shatters the self. Resilience that broke the soul. Resilience is widely admired. It's the trait we assign to people who make it through unimaginable pain and still stand. Survivors, fighters, those who get back up, time after time, no matter how many times they fall. Resilience is often seen as the gold standard of human strength, the ability to endure, to bend without breaking. But beneath that praise is a truth no one likes to say aloud. Sometimes what looks like resilience is actually quiet destruction. The paradox is this: resilience can break you, slowly and invisibly, until there's almost nothing left of who you were. At first, it looks like power. You power through heartbreak, through trauma, through loss. You function in the face of exhaustion. You hold your composure while everything around you falls apart. People applaud you. They admire your strength. You're so strong, they say, as if that strength is proof that you're okay. And you nod, because that's what strong people do. You stay quiet. You carry on. You convince others and yourself that you're surviving. But what they don't see is what happens when you're alone. The numbness, the fatigue, the inner disconnection from your own needs. The voice in your head that says, you don't have time to fall apart. You wear your resilience like armor, but inside, something is cracking, something vital, something human. That's where the paradox emerges. The very thing that allows you to keep going, your capacity to endure, is also what prevents you from healing. Because healing often requires collapse. It requires surrender. It asks you to stop performing strength and admit, I'm not okay, but resilience won't let you do that. Resilience says, keep pushing. Be grateful. Don't complain. And so, instead of processing your pain, you pack it deeper. You keep moving forward while something inside you stops growing. In many cases, the world reinforces this. We live in a culture that rewards high-functioning pain. If you keep producing, you're seen as admirable, even if you're slowly unraveling. If you don't cry, people think you're fine. If you never ask for help, people assume you don't need it. And the longer you appear strong, the harder it becomes to admit weakness. You've built your identity around being resilient. If that identity crumbles, who are you? This paradox is especially haunting for people who've been through long-term adversity, poverty, abuse, chronic illness, systemic oppression. These individuals develop resilience not because they choose to, but because they have no other option. Survival becomes a way of life. And yet, that same survival mode often prevents them from accessing joy, rest, intimacy. They're too busy enduring to learn how to thrive. They mistake exhaustion for strength. They confuse silence with wisdom. They forget what it's like to feel safe because they've normalized being in pain. There's also an emotional cost that builds in secret. Resilient people often suppress grief, anger, fear, because there's no space to fall apart. But suppressed emotions don't disappear. They find their way out through anxiety, burnout, insomnia, depression. The body keeps score, even when the mind is busy being strong. And over time, the toll adds up. The soul begins to feel brittle, disconnected, exhausted beyond repair. Resilience also creates isolation. People assume you don't need anything, that you've got it handled. So they stop checking in, they stop asking questions, and the resilient person, so used to managing on their own, doesn't know how to ask for help when they finally need it. Their strength has become their silence. Their independence has become their loneliness. So what do we do with this paradox? We start by recognizing that resilience is not the same as healing. Surviving is not thriving. Endurance is not peace. And just because someone can carry pain doesn't mean they should have to carry it alone. We need to give strong people permission to be soft, to cry, to collapse, to rage, to rest. Not as a failure of character, but as a necessary part of recovery. We must learn to ask not just, how are you managing, but where does it still hurt? Not just, what have you survived, but what haven't you been allowed to grieve? And for those living inside this paradox, it begins with a terrifying act, admitting that strength has become a burden, that resilience has a cost, that maybe, just maybe, it's time to lay it down, not forever, but long enough to remember what it feels like to be human, not just a survivor. Because resilience should never be a performance. It should be a bridge to something softer, freer, more whole. If it becomes a wall, it's no longer saving you. It's trapping you. You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to keep proving that you can endure. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. Next is a paradox where gratitude masks despair. Gratitude that masked despair. Gratitude is universally recognized as one of the healthiest emotions a person can cultivate. It brings perspective. It lifts the mind out of darkness and focuses it on what is present, what is good, what is still whole. We're told that gratitude is the antidote to suffering, that no matter what we're going through, there is always something to be thankful for. But inside that truth lies a paradox few people recognize. Sometimes gratitude doesn't heal. It hides. Sometimes the more we try to focus on what we're grateful for, the more we bury what's breaking inside us. In those moments, gratitude doesn't reveal peace. It masks despair. It begins innocently. You remind yourself that others have it worse. You tell yourself to stop complaining. You think of your health, your family, your job. You list your blessings like armor, stacking them high so that the pain behind them can't be seen. And for a while, it works. You smile. You cope. You say the right things. But underneath the surface, something starts to grow. A silent sense of betrayal. A voice that whispers, if I have so much to be grateful for, why do I still feel this way? That's where the paradox blooms. Gratitude, when weaponized against your own suffering, becomes shame. You start to believe that your sadness is ungrateful, that your loneliness is selfish, that your anxiety is unjustified. After all, you have food, shelter, people who care. What right do you have to be unhappy? So instead of expressing your pain, you silence it. You shrink it. You pretend it isn't there. This isn't gratitude. It's emotional suppression in disguise. Many people raised in environments that devalued emotional honesty learn this pattern early. They're told to look on the bright side, be thankful you even have that, or stop being dramatic. Emotional pain is dismissed, reframed, or ignored. Gratitude becomes a tool of discipline rather than comfort. And eventually, those people grow into adults who respond to their own pain by smothering it in positivity. They believe that struggling is a failure of perspective, not a natural part of being alive. You see this paradox clearly in people who experience quiet despair, the kind that doesn't look like depression or panic, the kind that lives in the background of otherwise successful lives. They wake up, go to work, take care of their families, and still feel hollow. But when they try to name that emptiness, they choke on guilt. I should be thankful, and so they never speak it aloud. Gratitude is used here not as an opening, but as a closing. Not as a window to presence, but as a lock on expression. And the damage runs deep. Because when you deny your pain long enough, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your ability to even recognize what's wrong. You stop trusting your own experience. You convince yourself that the discomfort is your fault. This paradox also plays out in grief. Someone loses a loved one, and they hear, "At least you had those years together. At least you have other people who love you. Be thankful for the memories." These words are not cruel. They come from good intentions, but they dismiss the need to sit in sorrow. They bypass the ache. They imply that gratitude should be louder than grief, and that grief somehow is ingratitude, but it's not. You can be grateful and devastated. You can miss someone every day and still thank life for the time you had with them. These emotions are not opposites. they are companions. The same paradox appears in trauma recovery. Survivors often feel pressure to find the silver lining, to be grateful for the lessons. And while post-traumatic growth is real, not all pain needs to be turned into a blessing. Some experiences are just painful, and forcing gratitude too soon, or expecting it at all, can deepen the wound. It tells the survivor, your pain only has value if it turns into wisdom. But pain has value simply because it's real, because you lived through it, because it hurt. So what's the way out of this paradox? We start by redefining gratitude. It isn't a muzzle. It isn't a moral obligation. It's not a tool for comparison or a shield against sadness. True gratitude exists alongside truth. It doesn't erase pain, it sits beside it. It says, yes, I am hurting, and still, I see beauty. Yes, I feel broken, and still, I notice the light. There is room for both. There must be. We also learn to notice when gratitude is being used as a script, when we're saying thank you because we're supposed to, not because we feel it. When we're using gratitude to avoid difficult conversations, difficult feelings, or difficult decisions. In those moments, it's not gratitude we need. It's permission. Permission to be messy, to not be okay, to say, I'm grateful, but I'm also exhausted, I'm scared, I'm lonely, because you can be thankful and still be struggling. You can count your blessings and still feel the ache of what's missing. And sometimes, the most honest gratitude is not a celebration, it's a whisper. I'm still here. Next is a paradox where growth causes self-erasure. Growth that destroyed identity. Growth is one of the most revered ideals in modern life. We're told to evolve, to improve, to become better versions of ourselves. Growth is framed as enlightenment, a journey toward truth, clarity, maturity. It's seen as progress, as proof that we're doing life the right way. But within this upward pursuit lies a paradox that quietly unravels the self. Sometimes in trying so hard to grow, we lose who we are. We trade authenticity for evolution. We shed so many layers that we forget which ones were ours to begin with. This is the paradox, growth that destroys identity. It often starts with good intentions. A person recognizes a toxic behavior, a harmful belief, a painful pattern. They begin the work, therapy, introspection, books, meditation. They confront the past, examine the roots, take accountability. Slowly, they begin to change. At first, it feels liberating, lighter, cleaner. But then something strange happens. Pieces of their old self begin to feel suspicious. The jokes they used to make, the clothes they used to wear, the music they loved, all start to feel childish, outdated, or low vibration. They don't abandon these things with peace. They abandon them with shame. This kind of growth becomes performance, a curated personality meant to reflect who they think they should be, not who they are. They filter their emotions through a lens of healing rather than feeling. Anger becomes unprocessed trauma. Sadness becomes a lesson. Every response must be elevated, mature, controlled. And slowly, the raw, contradictory, imperfect person underneath is silenced. That's when growth becomes erasure. The tragedy here is subtle. People don't realize they're disappearing. They believe they're becoming more aligned. But alignment without authenticity is just self-rejection with better vocabulary. They learn to speak the language of growth, but they stop speaking in their own voice. And the more praise they get for their new self, the calmness, the wisdom, the peace, the more pressure they feel to maintain the image, even when it doesn't feel honest anymore. In some cases, this pressure comes from spiritual or self-help communities that celebrate detachment, ego death, or neutrality. They reward distance over passion, silence over conflict, restraint over expression, and people, eager to belong or to ascend, begin to strip themselves of anything unrefined. They stop being messy, stop being loud, stop being themselves. They mistake dullness for wisdom. And when they feel something raw, jealousy, rage, lust, they don't express it. They label it as shadow work and lock it in a journal. But healing isn't supposed to kill your personality. Growth is not a process of becoming someone else. It's a process of remembering who you were before the world told you to change. We see this paradox in people who've undergone massive transformation through loss, recovery, career shifts, or spiritual awakening. They come out the other side wiser, yes, but also disoriented. The old version of themselves doesn't fit anymore, but the new version feels like a costume. They wonder, who am I now? What do I even like? Am I growing or just editing myself into someone more acceptable? This identity confusion isn't failure, it's a signal, a reminder that growth isn't linear and it isn't pure. Real growth is messy. It makes room for contradiction. It allows you to heal without purging every trace of who you used to be. You can become more aware and still tell inappropriate jokes. You can be deeply spiritual and still crave sex, money, or validation. You can meditate in the morning and scream into a pillow at night. None of that means you're failing. It means you're real. The danger of this paradox is that it encourages self-surveillance. You begin to monitor every reaction, every thought, every emotion. You ask, is this healed? Instead of, is this mine? You stop trusting your gut because you're afraid it might still be wounded. But healing doesn't mean deleting your instincts. It means learning when to trust them and when to challenge them. True growth is not about erasing who you were. It's about integrating who you were into who you're becoming. It's about carrying forward the parts of yourself that still feel alive, still feel honest, even if they don't match the aesthetic of a healed person. Because sometimes, the most honest thing you can do isn't to change, but to stay the same in a world that constantly tells you to evolve. So, how do we escape this paradox? We give ourselves permission to stop polishing, to stop upgrading, to stop treating our lives like a constant renovation project. Growth is valuable, but it's not everything. Sometimes what you need isn't a breakthrough, it's a return, a remembering, a reconnection with the unfiltered, unrefined self who still lives underneath all the layers you've added in the name of becoming better. Because if you lose that self, no amount of growth will ever feel like home. Now comes the conclusion, where we return to the heart of why these paradoxes matter and what they reveal about the human experience. Would you like me to proceed with the final conclusion? We began this journey believing we were exploring paradoxes, twisted puzzles buried in the folds of human behavior. But what we uncovered was something more intimate, a mirror. Each paradox didn't just point to abstract contradictions, it pointed to us, to the way we love and hurt, hope and hesitate, heal, and hide. We saw how our virtues, empathy, patience, resilience, gratitude, can quietly turn against us. How the very tools meant to save us sometimes deepen our wounds. These weren't just ideas. They were lived truths, felt realities. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all is this: by confronting what's uncomfortable, what we'd rather not see, we get closer to something honest, something freeing. The goal of this journey was never to shame or to solve. It was to notice, to slow down and say, maybe I'm not broken. Maybe the way I feel makes sense. If you recognize yourself in these stories, know this: awareness is not a burden. It's a beginning. And once you've seen these patterns, you can choose differently. Not perfectly, but more consciously. And that may be the only kind of growth worth chasing. The kind that brings you back to who you were before the world made you forget.